Okay, so what I want to do with this video is give you an easier map, a more recognizable map to help you recognize the differences between the four stages. What I'm going to do is I'm going to build off the previous part in which I talked about the different kinds of communities that each of these stages creates, and I'm going to add another piece to it. The idea is ultimately that this helps you to be able to discern the differences more clearly in order to enrich your reading of poetry and your writing of poetry. And I just wanted to quickly interject. I've just finished filming the video, but it occurred to me that I didn't make it explicit that this video, part 13, is tying up part 10, in which I spoke about poetic communities and configurations. I talk about and recap that in the next slide anyway, but I did just want to make sure it was explicit for the listeners before we get into it. So this is what we covered in the previous part. You've got the four stages, each with their own mode of engagement, which is their sense, their virtue, and the community they create, and the configuration that they represent, or that represents them. So this last piece was, I think, perhaps a more ambiguous one, because I was trying to symbolize these four different stages and the difference between them. And what I'm going to add to this is just going to slot that into place. So at the sentimental stage, we have essentially a site. That's what a scene gathers on. And a scene, as we spoke about, is a more superficial relation. And it's more temporary. When you think of a scene, it's something that passes quickly. It bubbles up and then it passes and is ephemeral. Then we get to the scholar, and now something a little bit more lasting is starting to be created, which is a scaffold. But that's different to a settlement that is inhabited. That's what a sanger is. There's that relation that lives in that scaffolding now and animates it. And then at the final one, we have the synod or the synagogue, which is when that home is turned into a temple and is consecrated and is related to the sacred. Okay, so here are the four different stages according to the relationship phase. So the first one corresponds to, the sentimental stage corresponds to capture. So this is the first heat of romantic love and interest. Perhaps this is on my mind after having just gone to a friend's wedding and having a look at this overarching cycle. So capture is, it does look like love because there is an obsession with the other person, perhaps. And desire. But we know that desire is a part of love and that there is actually a deeper form of it beneath, spirit. So that is why it's only apparent love. Then we get to courting, or your engagement, and that's when the relationship becomes a little bit more serious. You come to know one another more. And so it does look like wisdom. So it looks, comparative to the capture phase, it looks like a much more calm and balanced and moderate form of a relationship. But, and this is actually how I was able to see how this mapped on. When I was initially creating the previous presentation on this, when I was charting out the site, scaffold, settlement, synagogue. I had a quote in my mind, but I couldn't quite place it. And then I managed to place it, and then it made me see this sequence. And the quote was from Juliet, in Romeo and Juliet, in which she says that she has bought a mansion of love, but not yet possessed it. And I just like that quote because it indicates that in the courting phase, it is the equivalent to building a scaffold, a mansion, but not yet possessing it, inhabiting it with a real consummated relationship. And so that consummation, which happens when one is actually married and through the marriage, is the next stage. That is to possess, in a way, the mansion, to animate it, turn it into a home, rather than just this empty, gilded, aesthetic palace or structure or scaffold. And then at the bottom one, my face might be covering it, we have creation. And that is when we proceed to, in the course of a relationship in which we have consummated our love, what is born out of that is another life. And that does correspond to the synagogue. And that life is born out of real understanding of the other person as well, real relation and real understanding, if it is to be done well and appropriately. And so what we have is we've got apparent love at first, then apparent wisdom, and then in the consummation phase, we have what is actually real love, because it is real relation, and then real wisdom for the creation phase. Because that is, why is it wisdom? Because it is understanding born of a real relation. And you can't, I think, have wisdom without genuine relation. That would be impossible. You can't understand something without first having some real relation to it as it is in its own context and nature, which is what sight does. And so each of these maps onto the different phases as well. So in the capture phase, we have touch, because that is what one is obsessed with touching the loved one. Courting is coming to, I suppose, ensure that they conform to social conventions as well. I mean, traditionally, that's what courting meant. And so, but it is also, you're starting to come to know them a little bit more deeply than just touch, which is what taste is. You're starting to, just like when you eat a fruit and you taste it, you do break through the skin a bit. And so you do actually get a sense of something closer to who they are. But you don't really fully come into relation with who they are more fully until you start engaging in that deeper level with scent, and you start following them back to their source. That's what the consummation is. And then sight is once that relation is there, the understanding and the perception that comes from that. And so those are the 4 relationship phases that I just wanted to map onto these. Well, specifically what I wanted to do was just give you something a little bit more real to hang on to, that completed the site, scaffold, settlement, synagogue development. Okay, so I just wanted to add one more piece to this, which was I just wanted to map it onto Coleridge's notion or system of imagination. As you might know, because that's what we're trying to do, we're trying to build a metapoetic system, and so we're trying to put into its place not just poetry, but poetics. And Coleridge is one of the more sophisticated poetics out there. Even though we have to kind of piece together his system. But broadly speaking, his system boils down to a key distinction between fancy, which is a kind of associative thinking, which is more mechanical, versus the secondary imagination, which he sees as having something more vital and living in it. And fancy, the reason why I wanted to map it onto Coleridge, why am I even going down this road, is simply because fancy does have this kind of pun, double meaning that fits onto what we're tracking here, because fancy is, of course, another word for capture, for being captured by someone, desiring them, having a crush on them. You fancy someone. And it implies that kind of surface level engagement. But at the same time, this surface level imaginative kind of drive or mode. And then we have the secondary imagination, which I've tried to find words that also have this punning double meaning as well. So we move from fancy to fusing. So kind of a fusing imagination, which is a little bit deeper, where we are starting to build more forms. We're starting to commit to something, to the object of poetry in a bit more of a direct way, to tradition. Our relationship to poetry becomes a bit more serious. We are engaged with it. And then fidelity, where we actually become it's an imagination of fidelity, for lack of a better word, a fidelis sort of imagination is one in which there is that consummation, while at the same time also meaning it is a direct relationship with the and a faithfulness to essence. And then we have the fruiting of that, which is like the equivalent to the baby coming through. So a fruiting kind of relationship and a fruiting imagination is one that is born out of understanding essence. And so what I'm trying to break down is that there are 3 tiers to secondary imagination, which Coleridge hasn't exactly charted out. I've had to come up with terms for that. And that's what I'm going to just tie up in the next slide. So I'm going to read out a quote from Coleridge. I'm going to give you my brief interpretation of it, and then I'll wrap this up. So he writes, secondary imagination I consider as an echo of the former, primary imagination, which is more the creative power of spirit and man, coexisting with the conscious will, yet still identical with the former in the kind of its agency, and differing only in degree and in the mode of its operation. This is the important bit. It dissolves, diffuses, dissipates in order to recreate, or, where this process is rendered impossible, yet still at all events it struggles to idealize and to unify. It is essentially vital, even as all objects, are essentially fixed and dead. A lot of people have found that to be quite powerful, potent. And it's better than fancy, which is a step up, and that is what the romantic sort of movement, broadly speaking, was trying to move away from. But it is still limited, and I see it as actually being quite limited. And I tried to show that limitation with these visual sort of diagrams. At the fancy level, we have the mind, but it's not glowing, it's dead, it's not vital. It's mechanical and it's dealing with dead objects. Then what Coleridge is talking about here is fusion, where the mind is vital, but it hasn't yet gripped onto essence, which is what we see as a star in the next symbol. And then the light, the sun at the end, is the understanding the essence, as well as having a vital mind to grasp essence and this understanding. Fusing is a term that conveys that it's still really weirdly form-based, what Coleridge is talking about. Even this dissolving, diffusing, dissipating, struggling to idealize, to unify. It's like he's trying to say the mind becomes vital and so can better deal with forms, and turn the forms into something better. But he's left out of that picture essence. The mind is meant to be vital, yes, but it also has to map onto and try to express essence, which is that which is vital. To try and just turn with it, to leave that out of the picture makes your poetics very incomplete. There's no point in having a vital mind if there's nothing to capture, nothing vital to capture with that vitality of your mind. And so I tried to just fill in Coleridge's poetics here. And if you want more on this matter, I do talk about this more in my next video after this. But this is something I can return to if need be. But basically there's just a general trend with scholars and people trying to move out of the scholarly but not knowing how to map onto essence quite yet. And they think that everything kind of has to come out of their own isolated mind. Even if that mind is more vital, it's still isolated, and it's not participatory. And that's because they can't sense and relate to the thing that's real in their environment, the essence. And so I'll leave that there. That about does it, and we can keep building on this in future presentations if need be. Thanks for listening.